All right, Coach Dewolf. So before we go to the last phase where we talk about the spread of basketball throughout Manicaland, can you take us back to how the first courts were actually built? What were the first courts you used back in the early '80s, and how did we get the two courts we have today by the boys' dining hall?
Okay, well, the first courts were, I think I mentioned it earlier. You had just the dirt court down at the primary school, and then the next one was it was a tar court, so it had a decent surface up there. But then it didn't take long, so early '80s we had a woman, Barbara Shenstone, who was a Canadian teacher who came to teach for a while at Hartzell. And she organized with the Canadian government to get a grant for $2,000 to be able to build courts. So the students at that time who were playing basketball, this was the early '80s, they then actually went out there, they collected bricks, and then they also did a lot to level the courts and things like that. And what ended up happening was they then, together with some of the workers from the school and everything, basically built the playing surface on this basketball court. At that point then they had to still build the standards and things, so what we did was we got our physics teacher to put down what it is that a good standard would look like to really hold the baskets secure and everything. And the ones that you see there, even today, are the ones that were built at that time.
Wow.
And they obviously were built really, really well. Well, what we did was it was built up of multiple short pieces that were just stuck together in all different directions. And then the students would now hacksaw these things off, and then I would take them and weld them onto the fixture that we were making. And we just built the whole thing that way. Then carried it over there, set the thing up, poured the concrete in and everything. And those standards, the basic standards, are still, from what I can see, virtually 100% right now.
Yes, yes.
Which is what, probably 10, 20, 30 years later.
So what year were the first?
82.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a long time. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's more than 30 years.
Yeah, 35 years, something like that.
I'm approaching 40 years.
And so the court itself, yeah, it struggled a little bit. What we then ended up doing, we built the basic surface. Then a number of years later, we added to the side another area because we wanted now to have 4 small courts going across instead of just the 2 big courts going lengthwise. So we built that, but nowadays that's not to use very much. It's basically
Right.
So then that plan of how we build it and everything, we then started trying to promote that around the province.
Okay.
And anytime we could get a team or a school to agree to get basically a playing surface down, we would then come in and we organized with I think it was, no, not Border Timbers, it was the Wattle Company gave us the poles for making the standards, and then the Leyland, at that time Leyland, the car manufacturers in Mutare there, used to bring in their car parts in these big crates, and they had really nice big boards that we could use for backboards.
Okay.
So they donated the backboards, and then Rogers, one of the players from the old Florida sides and everything, he then donated, for every place that built a good court, he would donate the rims. So he welded the rims together and everything and gave them to them.
Okay.
And then we got teams over, or churches and things, especially this was through Sonny Reavis that we got donations of balls and uniforms and even shoes. He managed to get Converse to give us a bunch of those. So basically all of that, then we would donate these things to any team that got itself produced.
Okay.
And we would now all get in to my little 120Y car. And this would be 2 full teams, so 10 players, and these were big guys,
Right.
I mean, I can remember the ones with long legs would sit in the back seat and their feet would be all the way up on the dashboard in the front, And they packed in there, and then we had those 10, and then we had 2 of our top girls, Domitila and Rosemary, who would now have a portable microphone that they would call play-by-play thing going on and explain to the crowd why the whistle had been blown and stuff. Then the other one was the referee.
Right.
And so these teams would now go out there and play against each other for a demonstration game. Then we would pull in some of the players from the new side that had never played before and get them into the 2 teams, and we sometimes had shirts made that would be like Sherukuru United or something.
Right.
And we get a couple of our players to become a player of their team, and they'd go against these others and everything. So in that way we spread basketball through Manicaland. So we went from the 5 schools that had been playing traditionally to about 55 schools.
Wow.
And a lot of this was because we just really, really pushed to promote it around the province. So
Wow.
It was good fun.
Yes. And then also, as we finish off, I think 94 after you left, I remember 95, 96, those are my last 2 years of high school. And I think an amazing thing started happening. Once you went to Hillcrest, all the seeds you had planted, your legacy continued. All your former players, Wimbai Darikwa, they assumed the role of volunteering to coach. Chenji Chambara, volunteering to coach. I remember now you have Tawanda Doza, who's coaching in China. You have Bo Collins Kanjanda, who's in Belgium, still working in basketball. I remember, the Farai Chizungus, Nyarazi Nyananda coach at Mutambara, helping with African University. It's been amazing just to watch all these players that you helped develop. They've spread on, some have moved into coaching, but they still all have the same passion for basketball. How has it been interacting with some of your players 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago and still talking about these fun basketball stories from in the early 80s and 90s?
Well, that team, I talked about earlier, that was so powerful in the mid 1980s. During their last year, we played a number of games going up to Harare in 1985 in order to build our power. But in 1986 we didn't travel at all. We were the national champ. If somebody wanted to come, they could play us, but we weren't going to go anywhere. And not too many teams came. So instead, we used those years now promoting basketball, moving from school to school. And what that was in Manicaland, and what that did was it made every player on the team a coach. And that's a tradition that we just continued going. So I would like to think that basically every kid that would go through those years learned so much about basketball, even the crowd itself, I mean, I got a big chuckle because my first year at Hillcrest, we organized to go over to Hartzell to have a game. And so now they were the opposition there.
I remember I was there.
But what was so funny was, I think not the time you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
There was another time when the Hartzell team had gone somewhere.
Oh.
And we now went against the Form 6s who basically had never played a game of basketball, but they lived on the basketball courts.
Right.
Right. Always playing, all the time and everything. And these guys came down, and I mean, it was just such a fun thing, and they killed us. They absolutely killed us. And this wasn't even the Hartzell basketball team. But what really stands out, is the way that everybody just wanted to stay in the game, stay in contact with the game, and you know, some of my happier moments have been recently, you know, communicating with some of these guys from around the world who, you know, are still, you know, involved, and even those who aren't involved, you know, but I mean, you take a girl, okay, I have one girl there that was playing, that then came over here to the States, and she was on a basketball scholarship. She played at University of Pittsburgh, and then after she finished that, I said, okay, this was about 15 years later now. I said, okay, so what are you doing now? And she, what are your hobbies? Are you married? No, I'm not married. Oh, okay. What are your hobbies? And she said, well, the thing I do in my free time is I'm doing kickboxing.
Right.
And you know, this kind of thing where basically kids just doing what they love to do. You know? And sport and sport has become so much a part of their life that you can't just stick it aside, you know, and forget about it.
Right.
And whether it's basketball or something else, you know, I consider that I've always been impressed that with very few exceptions, there are a couple, but very few exceptions, most of our former players still are quite amazingly fit. We had a great day a couple of years back when I was celebrating my 50th year of teaching.
Yes, sir.
And we invited guys from all over Zimbabwe to come in. And I remember a person like Taipane, Mike Nyambuya, some of these guys coming in to celebrate it with us. And they were amazingly fit. And Taipane had not touched a basketball